What is going on, everybody? I am AJ, and I'm going to give you guys the breakdown, or not the breakdown, the recap for UFC 260. I'm so used to saying breakdown because it seems like all I've been doing is breakdowns lately. But here to do a rare recap, and part of it is because we actually don't have a UFC event next weekend. We do have a Bellator event. More on that in a moment. So I just wanted to give you guys some more content. I know that on weeks where there's no UFC, we can maybe feel a little bit lost on Saturdays, but there's always something to do, right? So thank you guys so much for tuning in. We're going to talk about the card from top to bottom. I'm not going to go over like every single bet that I had. I'm just going to kind of recap the card just from a general perspective, just share some takeaways, some things that stuck out, and potentially, apply them going forward. Before doing that, though, I just like to let you guys know two things really quickly. One of them is PrizePicks. PrizePicks is awesome. Brand new daily fantasy site. You could use promo code AJ100 for 100% instant deposit bonus for up to $100. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy site that allows you 100% instant deposit bonus. It's just you versus a projection in the system. There's no sharks, there's no fish, there's no mass multi-entries. You don't have to worry about players competing with all these sort of like advanced resources. It's just a straightforward fantasy game. Think of it as, you submitting an entry or a fantasy prop or a pick'em type game. Super simple, straightforward. And again, 100% instant deposit for up to $100 on that first deposit. And PrizePicks is available on the Apple App Store and Google Play. So very accessible. Throwing that out there. I believe in it long term. That's why I'm promoting it. I don't want to promote something unless if I truly believe in it long term, and I really do believe that there's a lot of value here. So more on that in the description of this video below on YouTube. Also, RotoWire 10-day free trial for RotoWire. Obviously, RotoWire is a company that I contribute to, but I believe in their content long term. Before I actually started working for RotoWire, I was using their daily fantasy tools on the daily. And let me tell you, it's super simple, super stress-free, saves me time, and just helps me a lot more as a daily fantasy sports player. So that's also in the description below. And it, again, totally for free. You don't have to enter a promo code. It's in the link in the description below. So if after 10 days you use it and you find out this isn't for me, by all means, you could just, move on to the next thing. So excited for that. Also, one more thing. I am teaming up. If you guys didn't already see it already on Twitter, I'm teaming up with Brett Apley for his website, dailyfanmma.com. I'm going to be producing Bellator content on there. So like we have Bellator 255 here coming up next week on a week where there's no UFC. So going to be helping Brett out with that. It's going to be betting hub style content. So what you could expect from me is main card breakdowns for that event. In any event going forward, any bets that I have along with the breakdowns, also a podcast version of the main card breakdown. So a written and podcast version of the main card breakdown. And as a bonus, any bets that I'll have on the prelims. So it's going to be a full main card every single event with the added bonus of a bet and a breakdown for any prelim fights if applicable. So I'm super excited to be working with Brett. He's a great guy in the industry, puts out a ton of content, and it's going to be an incredible journey. So there's that. Let's get into this card. So first fight of the night, obviously, was Marc-Andre Barriault and Abu Azaitar. The story of this fight was cardio, right? And we talked about before, cardio is one of the most compelling things a fighter could have in a fight, because if you could be a great technical fighter, you could be very, very skilled, but as soon as the cardio starts to fail, all the deficiencies start to show. It's been a big thing that has hindered a lot of great fighters in their careers. I'm not going to name names, but there have been plenty of fighters that have, when they were prospects coming to the UFC, just going on a tear. One of the things that has hindered them is cardio, and it's just so important. Same thing with durability as well, right? Durability is an ultra compelling facet of mixed martial arts. The durability's got to be solid. Same thing with the cardio. Abu Azaitar was heading into this fight not having fought since the summer of 2018. And we've seen time and time again, activity is very, very important in this game. Marc-Andre Barriault, despite some early losses in his UFC career, has been much more active. So he definitely did have that going for him in his favor. Activity is important. And granted, Barrio went to full 15 minutes in all 3 of his UFC fights. So it's an important thing. I didn't have any action in this fight. I know this isn't a betting recap, but it was just a scenario where, again, it was the cardio that really helped Barrio out, because Azaitar definitely had some moments early on, but he couldn't fight a hard 3 rounds. That's ultimately what cost him. So kudos to Barrio. He was hungry to get in the win column, and he certainly got his win. And some of these fights, I'll just say, we'll talk about a bit more than others. Shane Young and Omar Morales. Not a whole lot to say here. Shane Young just didn't really put his foot on the gas for all 15 minutes. He wasn't fighting at his typical high pace. Perhaps the knockout loss that he's coming off of against Ludoville Klein was a reason why. Morales, also a big, dangerous guy, technical striker. It was kind of interesting to see Young come in with a game plan to try to clinch up with Morales, the more physical Morales, and try to take this fight to the ground. But it was Morales that was getting the better of the striking exchanges, did more damage over the course of 15 minutes, and that's ultimately what won him the fight. So kudos to Omar Morales, Modestas Bukauskas, and Mikhail Olechechuk. This was the fight where I think there was the most confliction amongst the community with the scorecards. I ended up scoring the fight for Bukauskas, but it wasn't like me, like I scored it for Bukauskas and I couldn't see the argument for Olechechuk. I certainly did. As I believe Cormier pointed out, he was walking forward more. He was pressuring. You could argue that he was landing the bigger shots. But Bukauskas, why I edged him in rounds 1 and 2 and ultimately the fight, was because I thought he was landing more volume, and the way he kind of closed off the rounds, particularly in round 2, just finishing very strong. I really felt like he put a stamp on that round, just like we'll get into with Miranda Maverick. Part of the reason why I think she won round 2, despite some controversy there amongst the community, was because of how she ended that round. She finished the round very strong, did a lot of damage, really poured it on Jillian at the end. So if you could leave the judges with that impression of ending the round very, very strong, you could easily steal the round. I mean, we saw it even not too long ago with Yana Kunitskaya against Caitlin Vieira, right? A lot of people thought that Vieira won the fight, and I totally get it. But I think ultimately why the judges ruled it for Kunitskaya, it came down to round 3, was because of how Kunitskaya ended the round. She was able to reverse Caitlin and do a lot of damage there with seconds left. So just leaving that last impression as the round is ticking down, I think is very important to live in the very, very important from the perspective of the judges. So it's very smart of fighters to do that. So Olechechuk, the winner there. I can't say right or wrong because I just don't really know. I could see arguments for both sides, even though I thought Bukauskas won. It wasn't a horrible decision by any means. So yeah, kudos to both guys. It was an exciting fight. Abu Bakr Nurmagomedov and Jared Gooden. Yeah, this was one of the more outcomes that I was pretty wrong about. I thought that Abu Bakr had to likely get his grappling going here in order to really take control over this fight, but it was actually his striking that did a lot of damage. I mean, Gooden had some moments early on, and he definitely hung in there, and he showed to be really tough. Abu Bakr, he was doing more damage. You could tell that he was hurting Gooden, and that's what it was able to get some of the rounds there. And ultimately the fight, he was able to take Gooden down finally in round 3, but he wasn't really persistently going for takedowns throughout the course of the fight. And I think it's partly because of how much success he was having with his striking. And he just figured probably like, well, if I'm having this much success striking, why even go for a takedown if I'm besting him on the feet and hurting him and potentially finish him. But he chose to do that in round 3, get a takedown, as we can see here, about over 4 minutes of top control time. So kudos to him on that performance. He needed a bounce back spot. So kudos to Abu Bakr Nurmagomedov. I think somebody pointed out on Twitter, Coach Khabib is actually 2-0 this month. The other fighter that he coached, Islam Makhachev, for UFC 259. So it's pretty interesting how that all works out. But Alonzo Menefield and Fabio Schernatz, Von Flue choke for Menefield, just like everybody drew it up, right? I'm kidding, of course. It was, this was actually nice to see out of Menefield, him actually go out there, fight with urgency, get the fight to the ground, and then show off a submission game that he's been working on. I love to see the improvements out of these young fighters. Menefield's a guy who a lot of people had high hopes for when he first came into the UFC, particularly after his Paul Craig knockout, including myself. But after those losses to Devin Clark and OSP, there was some pause amongst the community, and I can understand it. But this was a good performance for Menefield to get right back on track. And now that William Knight is facing, he's booked with somebody here coming up in about a week or 2 weeks, 2 weeks or further out. So perhaps they book that. But Menefield is definitely a serious force in this weight class. I mean, let's not forget that this guy was pretty much knocking out everybody in rounds 1 or 2 prior to the Devin Clark fight. And he almost did knock out Devin Clark in round 1. So the guy is always dangerous. And now the fact that he's added in the wrestling and grappling game is even more scary, right? So kudos to Menefield. I'm sure they'll give Schernatz a more favorable circumstance in his second UFC appearance. The UFC is very generous when doing that with fighters. Like these fighters that come in on super short notice, it's a tough ask for them. The UFC is generally giving them a more favorable matchup with more preparation the following fight. So I would expect that Schernatz is going to be no different. So we'll see what happens from there. Jamie Malarkey and Karma Worthy. Didn't really think that this was the most likely outcome of the fight. Obviously, because it happened, it seemed maybe more likely. I thought it was like a striker versus grappler matchup. Malarkey playing the role of the grappler and Worthy playing the role of the striker. But Malarkey went out there and got a quick knockout. Good for him. This wasn't really the only time that he showed power in his hands. He showed some power against Brad Riddell. The two of them were kind of brawling there in round 3, and he was able to hurt Riddell. So Malarkey's got some sneaky power in his hands. He came into this fight in great shape, and he was another example of a fighter who didn't look great on the scale, but look at how he performed. I mean, that's why I always take what I see at weigh-ins and what I hear in interviews with a grain of salt, because we've seen both sides of the coin, right? We've seen fighters that don't look good on the scale go out there and perform well. I pointed out the Ryan Spann example against Misha Serkinov a couple cards ago, but then I hear the other side of the equation. There's definitely been plenty of times where fighters don't look good on the scale and they don't perform well. But where I'm kind of with that is I just want to place more emphasis on the stylistic matchup. What I see on tape, I factor in stats as well, rather than just the interviews and the weigh-ins. Like, I look at that stuff, but I don't place a great deal of emphasis on it, because there's so much that goes on behind the scenes that I just don't know. And I would just be confusing myself if I try to act like I knew exactly what was going to happen. That I would just rather focus on the stuff that is much more quantifiable. The tape doesn't lie. So that's the stuff that I want to place a lot of emphasis on. UFCstats.com is another great resource. So, great result from Malarkey. Happy for the guy, especially considering, his last fight. You could definitely make a solid argument that he won. So it's nice to see him back in the win column. Jillian Robertson against Miranda Maverick. I was very impressed with Miranda Maverick here. She did get her back taken there. She did a good job of avoiding, Jillian sinking in the hooks, but Jillian was still able to drag her to the ground in round 2. But Miranda's really strong. She's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belt, and she's only 23. So even though she struggled a bit in round 2, that could definitely be a learning experience for her and something that she gets better from going forward. So the fact that the UFC gave her Jillian Robertson in her sophomore appearance within the promotion tells me that they think very highly of her. I know John Anik thinks very highly of her. I think very highly of her, as well as do others. So we'll see exactly how she develops. I think she's very talented. She's got a lot of tools to succeed, but I actually think that what she already has working for her is going to get better, and she's going to add some more tools as she kind of progresses throughout her career. So I think the future is bright for Miranda Maverick, and really happy for her in that performance. So we actually got to see her go a full 15 minutes here, which is nice, because just in her UFC debut, I mean, it was a great result for her and everything. She got a first round knockout, but it was only 5 minutes, right? There's only so much to take away there within 5 minutes, but we got to see a little bit of everything here. So I was very pleasantly surprised to see what Miranda showed in this fight against Jillian Robertson. That's a good win for her. Sean O'Malley and Thomas Almeida. I mean, Sean pretty much controlled this fight from start to finish. I mean, he was lined as around -300 favorite, and I mean, he pretty much looked like one out there, right? I mean, the fight was really never in doubt. Almeida was still able to land some leg kicks, but Sean seemed largely unfazed. So I think that the leg thing with Sean is, I guess worth mentioning going forward, but I don't think I'm ever really going to go into a breakdown of his and just, if I think he's the better fighter everywhere, but like the other side of the spectrum is like, well, oh, maybe his opponent just chops his leg down or something like that. That wouldn't really warrant me switching my pick to the other side if I think Sean's just a better fighter than him. And that's ultimately why I was on Sean here against Almeida. As long as his leg didn't give out, I thought he pretty much had this fight, and he controlled it from start to finish. So very good performance from O'Malley. He almost got the finish there in round one. Didn't. I know that there was a little bit of controversy with that. Like, why didn't he go out there and finish Almeida right away? I mean, I could hear that, but he doesn't want to be too overly aggressive. So there's two ways of looking at it. He got the job done anyway, regardless, in round three. And he's still, just like we talked about with Maverick, he's very young, so he's only going to get better, right? So something like that is something that Sean could take away and go back to the drawing board and look to improve on going forward. So, and like we talked about before the fight even happened, just because he lost one time, to me, doesn't say like, I'm not going to say I don't have high hopes for the guy just because he lost one fight to Marlon Vera, who, as we've seen, is a top 15 bantamweight. It's not like a bad loss, and the way it went down was just kind of weird anyway. So I still believe in Sean's talent long term. He's tremendously talented, and he just looks so fast out there and sharp. The tools that he utilized at range were beautiful. Just a phenomenal performance by Sean O'Malley. So kudos to him and his team. And shout out to Marcel Dorf. I think he recommended Sean fights. He did recommend Sean fight Song Yadong. I would be very interested in that fight. I hope that they book that fight. I saw it from Adam Martin, Song Yadong Sean O'Malley versus Rafael Assunção. That's also a very interesting booking as well. So the fact that we're talking about, these type of opponents for O'Malley is awesome, right? Because he's so young and he's already climbing the ladder very, very high. So, it tells me that, people do have high expectations, high hopes for him, looking at who they're talking about him being matched up with for his next fight. So, awesome stuff. Co-main event, Woodley and Luque. This fight was awesome for as long as it lasted. It was nice to see Woodley go out there and really go for it, because we didn't really get to see that from him in his last three fights, right? And of course, I mean, we could say in hindsight, look at who he's fighting, world-class fighters, this and that. But it could have really affected his confidence in terms of like being aggressive, but he didn't let that stop him. He went right after Luque, went for the clinch. But then it was Luque who made some very good technical adjustments in the clinch. He dug for the underhooks, I should say. Head positioning was beautiful. And as we could see here on the control time, he was actually getting the better of the clinch exchanges against a more physical Woodley. Why? Because of his better technique in the clinch. Strength disparity is definitely something that is noteworthy, but that gap in the strength disparity could be narrowed if the weaker fighter is more technically proficient. We kind of saw that with Alexa Grasso and Macy Barber, right? Like Barber's very physical for the weight class, but Grasso was able to get the better of those clinch exchanges and grappling exchanges because of her better technique. So that's why I always look at strength. I think strength is important, but I think technique prevails long term. Because you could be, you don't have to be the strongest or best of athletes. If you're great technically, you could compete with those areas that you're not as strong in terms of athleticism and strength. It's still nice to have those, being athletic and strong, but the technical gaps could be tightened with more proficient technique. So there's that. Yeah, this is in terms of the brawl. Woodley basically almost knocked out Luque. Pretty sure of that. He hit him with a big overhand right, rocked him, and then Luque countered with a left hook, and then he hurt Woodley, and then he was able to finish him on the ground. So Yeah, both guys are very, very dangerous. I'm a bit concerned about Luque going forward. Just we've seen him get hurt more and more in recent fights, and just he is hittable. If he gets matched up with a guy like Jeff Neal, like that fight would be awesome. But I actually think that would be one of the tougher matches for Luque. It's not one that it's one that I think he could still win, but that would be interesting. One of the tougher ones. Him and maybe a Leon Edwards rematch would be interesting. I mean, Luque is in a spot right now where he's definitely climbed the ladder, and his only losses in the division in the past few years in the UFC have been Leon Edwards and Stephen Thompson, elite fighters for the weight class. So Vincente Luque is going out there and doing his thing. He's winning fights. He's finishing fights. And yeah, good for him. He just beat a former champion. So interested to see who he draws next. Stipe Miocic and Francis Ngannou. Really happy for Francis. He avenged his loss. He looks so good out there. Man, I mean, he showed great composure, great takedown defense. And then he went for a takedown, man. I mean, like, it's scary now that, I mean, we already knew this guy was just next level strong and athletic, but now that he's got the technical aspects of his game, like, all figured out and proficient, I mean, this guy is going to be difficult to beat. And let's not forget, he's got a great chin. He's never been knocked out in pro MMA as a heavyweight ever in his pro career. So like anytime he wants to have a firefight with a guy, just like we saw in the Rosenstruck fight, like he's probably going to come out the better of those exchanges just because of his better durability and extreme power and athleticism, right? So kudos to Ngannou. This was a great win for him. I mean, man, I don't know who I'd favor to beat him, to be honest, after seeing that. I think the most competitive fight he would have in the division would be against Cyril Gane. I don't know how I'd line that, but that's just, me thinking out loud. The Lewis fight is interesting just because Lewis is extremely powerful as well. But I think I would say Gane is a tougher test for Ngannou. He's very athletic. He moves well. Gane's a great striker. Variety. Does he have craftiness? He's definitely not as dangerous as Ngannou, but it's an interesting dynamic. I would be interested to see how that one goes down. I don't know. Gane's just coming off a win against Rosenstruck. Maybe he needs one more win in the meantime. Or I was even thinking, like, if you do Gane versus Lewis and then Ngannou versus Jones or Miocic for the trilogy, I think that would be interesting. There's a lot of different things you could do. I mean, in a sense, it's nice that there's more. Well, for starters, right? It was like this. We were waiting for Stipe and Cormier to have their trilogy. And now that that's done, we're able to have more fresher matchups, I should say. We're getting a rematch here, but when you have Francis as the champion, that could make that John Jones fight materialize, right? And I think that would be a great fight for the UFC to make. I think that would draw a lot of dollars for a pay-per-view. And in the UFC, like, obviously we want to see these great matchups, and like Michael Chandler versus Charles Oliveira, for instance. So I got a comment here. I'll get to that in a second. Michael Chandler versus Charles Oliveira, for instance, is maybe not a fight that features the number 1 and 2 ranked fighters per UFC.com in the weight class. But what it does is it makes sense based off the circumstance, and people will really be interested in it because the stock on both guys is so high. And when we had the news where the UFC asked Dustin Poirier if he wanted to fight for the belt, and he said he'd rather fight Conor, that just kind of leaves it a window of opportunity for them to book guys like Chandler and Oliveira. Oliveira is on a tremendous winning streak, coming off a monster win against Tony Ferguson where he dominated 3 rounds. And Michael Chandler, I get the argument where people are saying like, oh, well, he's been in Bellator most of his career. I mean, now people know who he is, right? I mean, after, being featured in the co-main event on the same card as Conor McGregor and going out there and doing what he did, maybe I'm reading it wrong, but I think Chandler's a big draw now. I think his stock is extremely high. It was already high prior to the knockout, and I think it's even higher now, perhaps even at its peak. So those are why I like fights like that, Chandler and Oliveira. It's just this great fight but also it's going to draw a lot of eyes. Just from a marketing standpoint, it's a fresh matchup. People know who both guys are. And then even like Usman and Masvidal, the rematch. I mean, it's a rematch where like Masvidal's getting a title shot, but after losing his first title shot to Usman, but it's still a fight where it's going to draw so much, guys. Like, it really is. I mean, people will tune into that. People love Masvidal, and Masvidal gained a ton of momentum since coming back from that long layoff that he had. He went out there, he knocked out Darren Till, he knocked out Ben Askren, and then he finished Nate Diaz. So Masvidal, just like Chandler and Oliveira that we just talked about, and all these other guys, and Ngannou, they got momentum, and momentum goes a long way in this sport. Got some comments here. Anaconda Bets, what's up, man? Those leg kicks by Francis were heavy. Yes, dude, yes. Yeah, it was nice. We saw him throw leg kicks in the past, definitely, but I agree with you, not nearly as much as last night. Love to see that out of Francis. The guy's evolving his game, which is scary. Like, the guy's already a sensational talent, and he's seemingly getting better. Like, no fighter is perfect, but like, man, I mean, Ngannou he's right there, man. So congrats to him. That's awesome. I'm really happy for him. The journey for him to get to where he got to, it makes me so happy to see him as the champ. I know he's really wanted it for a long time, so it makes me happy. Marcus, what's up, Marcus? I don't see a path to victory for John Jones to beat Francis Ngannou. I don't see a heavier, slower Jones. Okay. Yeah. Shout out to Nubian Bookstore. That is true, man, because Jones has definitely looked slower these past two fights, right? And this is me purely speculating, but part of it is, I think, well, and let me just preface by saying, even if Jones shows up at his best, I do agree with you. Even Francis could still be faster than him for sure, and potentially by a sizable margin. I'm not ready to say that Jones is like athletically declining yet, because I think he's kind of been bored these past couple matchups. And maybe I'm totally off on that, but like, I just feel like Jones's like lack of motivation has kind of like made these recent fights more competitive. And that's ultimately why I think he's maybe looked a little slower than maybe say we saw him do in the past. But I definitely do agree with you that Francis, yeah, for sure. I would think that Francis would be the favorite for sure. I don't know that I would want anything to do with it from a betting perspective, but yeah, I mean, after seeing Francis go out there and do his thing, it's it's tough to pick against the guy, definitely. So thank you for that, Marcus. Yeah, I think we're going to wrap things up here. Thank you guys so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Please feel free to follow me on Twitter at AJ_SCHULLO. Please feel free to subscribe to this channel, like this video, and please feel free to leave a nice comment below. Thank you so much for the support, and best of luck.